Well, it finally happened. The Wheel of Time has been canceled. And honestly, I can't say that I'm surprised. Even though I didn't watch the show because I was waiting to start the books before I started the show, the reception that this show had been getting since it started from audiences and fans has never been good from what I've been seeing. People would always say that it looks really nice, but a lot of the changes that they made just didn't make sense, and they didn't like a lot of the things that the show was doing. As I chalk this up as a loss on my fantasy scoreboard, I can't help but think if it's possible to adapt fantasy. Obviously, there have been successes when adapting fantasy books to movies on the big screen or even to TV shows on the small screen. Maybe those successes were just one-off chances, and maybe it's too hard for Hollywood or a studio to adapt fantasy into just a adaptation that is not only a good, faithful adaptation of the source material, but just a good viewing experience, a good movie or good show overall. You know, I remember when I was little and a bunch of my favorite fantasy series were being adapted into movies or even TV shows. And I would get so excited that these were coming to, the big screen. And as the movies were released and I would sit down to watch them and I would have to sit through this 2-hour slop fest, I couldn't help but feel the air of disappointment grow stronger and stronger each minute as the movie was rolling on and on. And as that air of disappointment grew stronger and stronger, the flame of excitement that was ignited in me just got smaller and smaller until it blew out. And then after I finished the movie, I would sit there and stew in this weird headspace, trying to convince myself that what I just watched was good because it was made from my favorite series, from Eragon or Percy Jackson, whatever it was. I would convince myself that this was a great viewing experience because I got to see the characters that I've grown to know and love from these books I was reading. I got to see them visually live, on the big screen, but I was just being delusional. But now when I think back on those movies that let me down, I wonder, were they just bad movies? Were they bad adaptations? Were they both? And what does a fantasy series or fantasy book honestly need when it's being adapted for the big or small screen? Now, book adaptation can come many ways. It can try to be very faithful to the source material that is derived from to give us a viewing experience that is pretty similar to the books that we read. Or it can give us, this movie or a show that is basically very loosely based on whatever the source material for the, visual medium is. An example of this is like Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, the book, and then the Will Smith I, Robot movie. The two projects, the two entities are named the same, and they have probably a few characters that are named the same, but the Will Smith version is a fast, action-paced, story about the looming danger of robots, automation, and AI and everything. While Asimov's iRobot just looks at the relationship between humans and robots over a series of short stories. But the type of adaptations that we'll be focusing on for this video, like Wheel of Time, Harry Potter, or Lord of the Rings, are movies that are trying to give us a narrative or storyline that is similar to the books that they're based off of. So what exactly makes movies or shows like The Wheel of Time, Rings of Power, or Percy Jackson bad? If you ask the community, they'd probably say faithfulness. How faithful an adaptation is to the source material determines or can determine if that is a good or a bad adaptation. And honestly, if you ask me, I probably disagree. Sort of. I wouldn't say it's faithfulness. I believe it's more so, is the adaptation able to capture the same essence or soul that the movie that it's based off of is able, that the book that it's based off of is able to capture. But it makes sense why people would think faithfulness is a good indicator if an adaptation is good or not. Because if it's faithful to what was in the book, then it's bringing over those same beats and components from the book that made, the reader love the book in the first place. So bringing it over to the movie would probably do the same thing. So for me, one fantasy adaptation that really let me down was Eragon. I loved these books so much when I was in middle school. And at the time, like I said, I tried to convince myself that the movies were, good because I got to see Eragon and Saphira and Brahm, all of them on the big screen. And now I ask myself this same question. Did the movies capture the essence or the soul of the books, or at least the first book? Was it able to capture, of what the book was trying to get across to us when we were reading it? And the movie did not get any of that across to me at all. Okay. The movies were not able to capture that soul or essence of Eragon. And I think this is the same thing for a lot of the other adaptations that we're seeing, like The Wheel of Time, like The Rings of Power. But I don't think the only reason these adaptations were bad is because they weren't faithful to the source material. That is part of the reason. But I think a bigger reason is just that they were bad movies in general. They were bad viewing experiences, whether it's a show or a movie. Well, you can't make a movie that is a good movie just alone by itself, but it's unfaithful to the source material. An example of this would be The Wizard of Oz or I, Robot, if you want something fun and actiony. Those movies don't follow the source material of their books at all. There are aspects of them that you can see where they pulled things from the book, but they just kind of took parts of the book and ran with their own thing. The Wizard of Oz, great movie. I, Robot, depending on who you are, it's a good movie. It's a good action movie. But these adaptations that we're getting, like The Wheel of Time, or if it's Eragon or The Golden Compass, they're just not good movies. The acting in these movies are hit or miss. Maybe sometimes they'll have an A-list actor, like Daniel Craig in The Golden Compass. Sometimes they can have just a bunch of random actors, kind of like the kids in Harry Potter, and they have to, improve their acting and just find their way through the film as they're learning to become better actors. The dialogue, maybe it's just me, but I think dialogue in movies nowadays is just bland. The dialogue is bland. The dialogue was bland in a bunch of these older adaptations like Eragon or Percy Jackson, and the dialogue is still bland in shows like The Rings of Power or Wheel of Time. Rings of Power, where they have a budget of, I believe they said $1 billion for their 2 seasons, and your dialogue is like stale bread. And then the story or the plot of whatever the season or the movie is about, sometimes it can be so convoluted and confusing. They're just trying to, it seems like they don't want you to understand the plot. More so just trust them to tell you what the plot is. Or it's a hack and slash of a plot from the book that has turned into an action movie that is now marketed for teens to appeal to the younger viewers. And who cares about that? Yes, it's fun to look at, but to turn a beloved book, a beloved property into some shell of what it used to be, nobody's trying to watch that. I'm not trying to watch that. And it's why fantasy adaptations can't work, right? Because if studios aren't willing to actually make good movies first, make these books that are beloved by millions. You wouldn't be making a movie if it wasn't beloved by a, very large fan base already. Usually. They need to actually put in the effort to make a good movie And I'm not asking for something to be made, so it's like Game of Thrones season 1 through 6. It doesn't have to be that, but at least make sure that it's good. Make sure that the writing is good and the plot has some substance, something for the viewers to latch on to and keep them coming back and wanting to wait or anticipate the next season that's coming out. The biggest issue is that Hollywoods or movie studios, whether they be Netflix or Prime, whatever, they don't know what they want. And until they do, fantasy adaptations won't work. Studios will say they want the next Harry Potter, the next Game of Thrones, or Lord of the Rings. But let's not make it too long. And we also want it to appeal to the teens. So let's add a little bit of teen element in there. Also, don't forget to add the pity representation for the minority viewers. And we need to have the obligatory girl boss scene. When in reality, movies or shows like Harry Potter or Game of Thrones were only successful because the people that were making them, the studios at the time that were making them, put in the time and effort to really craft a story that they were planning on, taking years to tell. That doesn't happen often nowadays with a lot of these adaptations. And it barely happened back in the day either when I was younger. But I already know what the typical response might be. Like my first girlfriend, studios aren't ready to commit to something so long. They don't want to put all their investment into something when they don't know if it will give a return on the money that they put into the, project. You think the sensible thing would be for them to say, okay, we know this book series that we're about to adapt can go on for years, but it's a bit of a risk for us to dump all of our eggs into, planning out the future of this series. And we don't know if it'll be successful on the first go around. So let's go ahead and try to put our best foot forward with this first installment in the series that we potentially can see ourselves making a lot more installments in. And then you would think they would do their best on the first try. But for some reason, first Eragon movie, unfaithful and as a flop. First Percy Jackson movie, unfaithful and as a flop. First season of Wheel of Time, from what the Wheel of Time viewers are saying, unfaithful, they didn't like it. So instead of putting their best foot forward, studios decide to put whatever forward and make sure, and as long as it makes them the money that they put into it back. Maybe that's their goal all along. Maybe they just want to make a quick cash grab of these book series or book adaptations so that they can have a quick payday. Because even though we see movies like Percy Jackson or Eragon, The Golden Compass as failures, technically those projects are technically successful financially. They made double the money that was put in to make them. I think Golden Compass is the one that is a little bit under. So maybe that's a studio's end game after all. All I know is I don't blame authors like Brandon Sanderson for waiting a really long time before making his books into, visual mediums, whether that be on the big screen or the small screen. If all studios want to do is make a quick buck after I put years and years of my time into a series or a standalone book, you can bet your ass I'm not going to convert this book series into a movie until studios can figure out what exactly they're trying to do. And I'm not saying that authors shouldn't take movie deals or show deals for whatever from a streaming platform or a studio if they get offered to them. It's your right to do as you wish. You made the story. You can definitely go ahead and, sell the story to whoever is the highest bidder. Make your check. Do whatever you want with it. But just know that fantasy adaptations won't work until studios figure out that they want to actually commit to making good movies. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace. And stop with the 8 episode seasons.